The story of how my world cracked open begins on a night that carried a strange and heavy stillness, a stillness so dense that it felt like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to shatter. The life I thought I understood had been shifting softly for months, like quiet footsteps behind a closed door. And although I could not see the truth yet, I could feel it sliding closer with every passing hour. My name is Mariela Serrano, and for almost 40 years, I shared a home and a life and a history with Hector, a man of routine so strict they could have been carved into stone, a man who planned breakfast weeks in advance and folded his shirts with the precision of a librarian cataloging ancient manuscripts. But routine is not a shield against secrets, and the man I once trusted had begun returning home with shadows on his face. Shadows that whispered of places he should not have been and people he should not have touched. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the ceramic clock on the wall clicking and clacking in a steady rhythm, almost like a heart trying to warn me that another heart nearby was lying. The air in the room felt heavy, as if the walls had thickened with years of swallowed arguments. Hector arrived long after dinner time, his hair messy, his breathing uneven, his clothes carrying two scents, the one I knew and the one I never wanted to know. A sweet floral fragrance, bold and intrusive, as if it belonged to a person who had no fear, no shame, no hesitation. Hector avoided my eyes, walked past me, and collapsed into the bedroom where he sank into sleep with a snore that once was comforting, but now felt like a slap, a reminder that his peace came from someone who was not me. I remained at the table for minutes that stretched into years, then stood and began picking up his things, not because I wanted to, but because my hands needed something to do as my mind built theories I did not want to entertain. I moved his jacket, his wallet, his keys, and his phone, the phone glowing on the table like a small doorway to a truth I was not prepared to face. I tried to ignore it, but the light kept pulling my eyes until I reached out and touched the screen without meaning to, and there it was, a message, shining in the dim kitchen like poison wrapped in silt. "You were unforgettable tonight, Papa," followed by a heart painted in digital red, the kind of heart lovers send. Not children, not co-workers, not friends, but lovers. Lovers who should not have existed. Lovers who used a word that turned my stomach, because my daughter never called him that, nor would she ever send him a heart, not like that. Never like that, never ever. My fingertips trembled as I closed the message and searched for others, but there was nothing at all. Nothing in the inbox, nothing in the sent folder, nothing in the trash, nothing anywhere. So clean, too clean, frighteningly clean. It looked like a device that belonged to a man with no past and no guilt, except I knew what Hector looked like when he was lying, because he had once lied to me about something small, something ridiculous, and the guilt had shown on him like a stain that refused to wash out. But tonight there was no stain, only emptiness, an emptiness carved out carefully, like someone digging a tunnel under the foundation of my marriage. I placed the phone exactly where it had been and touched his jacket again to steady my breath, but instead discovered a receipt inside, crisp and fresh from a restaurant in San Marcos. Expensive, discreet, romantic, a place he used to take me decades ago when roses and promises still meant something. The receipt showed wine and 2 meals, and a time that matched the moment he told me he was in Austin, not San Marcos, and certainly not eating with someone who left the scent of unfamiliar perfume all over his shirt. My chest tightened until breathing felt foreign. I needed answers, answers that lived somewhere deeper than the kitchen. So I walked to the garage in silence, opened Hector's car, and breathed in a mix of gasoline, cologne, and that same floral fragrance that did not belong to me. I turned on the small flashlight from my phone and searched the front seats, the compartments, the console, until my hand brushed something smooth and slippery, and when I pulled it out into the dim beam of light, I felt my vision tilt. A tube, a used tube, something meant for intimacy, something that had not existed between us in years, something that answered more questions than I wanted answered. I stared at it for long seconds that felt like cold water running down my spine, my throat closing with humiliation and horror. I placed the tube back carefully, wiped my fingers on a napkin as though betrayal could stain the skin, and checked the back seat, finding crumpled napkins soaked with that sweet, defiant perfume, a perfume too strong for innocence, too bold for accidents, too deliberate for misunderstandings. I photographed everything, the tube, the napkins, the arrangement of items, as though documenting a crime scene, which in many ways I was. Back inside the house, Hector slept deeply, unaware that the truth had begun cracking its way through the shell of lies he built around us. I sat on the couch with my own phone, trembling in my hands, uncertain about what to do, but certain that the world I knew was falling apart piece by piece by piece. I tried to sleep, but each time I closed my eyes, I saw the message, the heart, the receipt, the tube, the perfume, the empty inbox, the lies slipping through the cracks of our life like smoke creeping beneath a door. When dawn finally arrived, pale and weak, Hector came to the kitchen acting as if nothing in the world had shifted, acting as if his conscience was clean as polished glass. He said he had important work and would be home late again. He said it with the ease of a man watering a plant, watering a lie, watering the roots of betrayal and watching them grow inside the house. I nodded, pretending ignorance, pretending confusion, when in truth, I had already made a decision that would guide every step from that moment forward.
As soon as he left, I called a private investigator recommended by an old friend. His name was Rodolfo Navarro, a patient, quiet man who listened carefully as I told him what I had found. He did not interrupt. He only said, "Bring everything and meet me within the hour." So I did. And when he reviewed the photos, he gave a slow nod that told me I was not imagining anything, and that the road ahead would not be easy, but it would reveal everything. That evening, as I sat alone among cooling trays of bread in my bakery, Rodolfo sent me a picture that shattered the last fragile hope left in me. Hector, walking into a restaurant, holding the hand of a woman I knew, a woman who had sat at my table many times, my daughter-in-law, Bianca, smiling at him with the kind of smile a wife is supposed to give her husband, not her husband's father, and certainly not my husband. My heart twisted violently inside me, her dress soft and floral, her lips painted with confidence, her posture close to Hector's, as if they belonged to one another, as if they had rehearsed this closeness in secret corners, in parked cars, in hotel rooms, in lies wrapped in perfume. The room swayed around me as I gripped my phone, unable to breathe, unable to speak, unable to accept what I already knew deep inside. This was not ordinary betrayal. It was layered, twisted, cruel, a betrayal that stabbed through blood and marriage and trust all at once. And as I stared at the photo, shaking from shock, a single thought rooted itself inside me, cold, calm, unmovable. This was only the beginning. The morning after the truth showed its first sharp edge, I moved through my house like a shadow, pulled forward by a force stronger than fear and heavier than grief, each step carrying a mixture of disbelief and a rising fire that burned hotter than any oven in my bakery. The sun crept slowly across the kitchen walls, as though hesitant to shine on a life already beginning to collapse under the weight of secrets I never asked to carry. In its light, I saw my reflection, pale, trembling, but fiercely awake, in a way I had not been in years. Awakened by betrayal, awakened by clarity, awakened by the kind of pain that pushes a woman to act. Hector sat at the table, sipping his coffee with the calm of someone who believed himself untouchable, someone who slept soundly beside a lie without remorse. His voice floated around the room, hollow and distant, as he spoke of another long day, more work, more commitments, more half-formed stories that no longer fit inside the structure of truth. I nodded because my strength would be wasted on a confrontation without evidence and without strategy. I needed more. I needed the whole picture, and I needed it clean enough to carve the truth into stone. Once he left, I called Rodolfo again, and he answered with the steady voice of a man accustomed to seeing human masks fall away. He told me he would follow Hector through the day, quietly, invisibly, until the truth revealed itself fully, not halfway, not in shadows, but in daylight, under witnesses, under sky, under unbreakable reality. I thanked him and waited, though waiting felt like swallowing fire with each passing hour. By the afternoon, my phone vibrated with a tone that made my heart stumble. Rodolfo had sent a new set of photographs and a short message saying he needed me to stay strong and prepared. I opened the images slowly, one by one, like peeling layers from a wound, each picture deeper than the last, each picture carving another piece of my trust into dust. In the first one, Hector walked beside Bianca outside a tall law office in the center of town, the kind of place where deals are made and legacies are rewritten. She looked elegant in a beige dress, her sunglasses large enough to hide her identity, her posture confident as if she owned the world that did not belong to her. Their steps matched, their bodies leaned slightly toward one another, and there was a closeness between them that echoed desire and conspiracy. A closeness that betrayed more than touch. It betrayed intention. The next picture showed them inside a hotel parking lot, a hotel known for privacy and quietly expensive rooms. Their heads bending toward each other as if sharing a secret too delicate or too dirty for the breeze to hear. Her hand brushing his arm, his gaze soft in a way I had not seen in years. Not toward me, not toward anyone unless he thought no one watched. Rodolfo sent a video as well, filmed from a distance, the camera steady, the truth undeniable. Hector and Bianca standing on a third-floor balcony, his arm around her waist, hers around his shoulders, their bodies fitting into one another with a comfort that stabbed through my chest like a blade, sharpened over time. His fingers brushed her hair in a gesture I once believed belonged only to the early days of our marriage, the days when love was our shelter and hope flowed freely between us. I watched the video again and again, my breath short, my heart thudding like a drum desperate to break free of the cage of my ribs. The betrayal was no longer suspicion, no longer signs, no longer whispers. It was living, moving, breathing right in front of me, undeniable in every frame. I pressed my hands to my face and tried to hold myself together, but my tears refused to fall, replaced instead by a cold, steady resolve that grew in my spine like iron. Late that evening, Rodolfo sent another message saying he had captured more evidence, audio this time, taken from a discreet device he carried always. He explained that Hector and Bianca were speaking about documents, about ownership, about transfers, about a chain of stores that sounded too much like my bakery chain, the one I built with my own hands, the one I nurtured through years of sweat and sacrifice, while Hector stood on the sidelines, never lifting a single tray or kneading a single piece of dough because he always claimed baking was my dream, not his.
When I listened to the recording, my blood felt like boiling water. Bianca called me that old woman with a voice dripping with disdain, as though I were an obstacle instead of the woman who welcomed her into our family. Hector told her not to worry because I trusted him too much and that I would sign whatever he placed in front of me without question. They laughed softly together, as though planning to steal the heart of my life was nothing more than an errand for the afternoon. I closed my eyes in the silent bakery, listening to the hum of the refrigerators and the quiet ticking of the mixer cooling down. I remembered the early days of building this place, the small space I rented, the scent of yeast that soaked into my hair, the late nights baking trays of bread to deliver before dawn. I remembered the pride I felt when my first shop expanded into 2, then 3, then more, and how Hector had pretended to smile at my success while secretly planning to take everything from me with the woman who married my son. The betrayal was no longer something happening to me. It had become something happening around me, inside my home, inside my business, inside my family, and I stood in the center of it all, torn between heartbreak and fury, between the desire to scream and the need to stay silent for the sake of precision, for the sake of strategy, for the sake of justice that finally felt within reach. I wiped my hands on my apron and stared at the evidence organized neatly in folders and saved on drives. Every piece a thread in a tapestry of lies that stretched further than I had imagined. The truth was spreading like smoke through the cracks of my life, thick enough to choke anyone who dared to deny it. And I was done denying it. Now, I needed a plan. Not to hurt them, not to destroy blindly, but to reveal them, to expose them, to let the world see them as they truly were, to make sure their lies collapsed under the weight of the truth they thought would remain hidden forever. I locked the bakery and walked home slowly, my steps steady, the night air cool against my skin, each breath clearing the fog inside me. I reached my house and saw the faint light glowing from the bedroom where Hector slept, oblivious to the storm preparing itself around him. My heart did not tremble this time. My hands did not shake this time. Only clarity remained. Clarity sharper than grief, clarity sharper than vengeance, and clarity sharp enough to carve a path forward. And as I lay down beside the man who betrayed me more deeply than I once believed possible, I whispered a silent promise to myself, not of revenge, but of truth, cold, relentless, and inevitable. The unraveling had only begun. The darkness before dawn held the kind of silence that feels thick enough to touch, a silence that presses against your skin and warns you that something irreversible is approaching, something that will pull the ground out from under your feet forever. I woke long before the first hint of sunlight and sat in the kitchen staring at nothing. The quiet electric hum of the refrigerator, the quiet ticking of the mixer cooling down. I remembered the early days of building this place, the small space I rented, the scent of yeast that soaked into my hair, the late nights baking trays of bread to deliver before dawn. I remembered the pride I felt when my first shop expanded into 2, then 3, then more, and how Hector had pretended to smile at my success while secretly planning to take everything from me with the woman who married my son. The betrayal was no longer something happening to me. It had become something happening around me, inside my home, inside my business, inside my family, and I stood in the center of it all, torn between heartbreak and fury, between the desire to scream and the need to stay silent for the sake of precision, for the sake of strategy, for the sake of justice that finally felt within reach. I wiped my hands on my apron and stared at the evidence organized neatly in folders and saved on drives. Every piece a thread in a tapestry of lies that stretched further than I had imagined. The truth was spreading like smoke through the cracks of my life, thick enough to choke anyone who dared to deny it. And I was done denying it. Now, I needed a plan. Not to hurt them, not to destroy blindly, but to reveal them, to expose them, to let the world see them as they truly were, to make sure their lives collapsed under the weight of the truth they thought would remain hidden forever. I locked the bakery and walked home slowly, my steps steady, the night air cool against my skin, each breath clearing the fog inside me. I reached my house and saw the faint light glowing from the bedroom where Hector slept, oblivious to the storm preparing itself around him. My heart did not tremble this time. My hands did not shake this time. Only clarity remained. Clarity sharper than grief, clarity sharper than vengeance, and clarity sharp enough to carve a path forward. And as I lay down beside the man who betrayed me more deeply than I once believed possible, I whispered a silent promise to myself, not of revenge, but of truth, cold, relentless, and inevitable. The unraveling had only begun. The darkness before dawn held the kind of silence that feels thick enough to touch, a silence that presses against your skin and warns you that something irreversible is approaching, something that will pull the ground out from under your feet forever. I woke long before the first hint of sunlight and sat in the kitchen staring at nothing. The quiet electric hum of the refrigerator, the quiet ticking of the mixer cooling down. I remembered the early days of building this place, the small space I rented, the scent of yeast that soaked into my hair, the late nights baking trays of bread to deliver before dawn. I remembered the pride I felt when my first shop expanded into 2, then 3, then more, and how Hector had pretended to smile at my success while secretly planning to take everything from me with the woman who married my son. The betrayal was no longer something happening to me. It had become something happening around me, inside my home, inside my business, inside my family. And I stood in the center of it all, torn between heartbreak and fury, between the desire to scream and the need to stay silent for the sake of precision, for the sake of strategy, for the sake of justice that finally felt within reach. I wiped my hands on my apron and stared at the evidence organized neatly in folders and saved on drives. Every piece a thread in a tapestry of lies that stretched further than I had imagined. The truth was spreading like smoke through the cracks of my life, thick enough to choke anyone who dared to deny it. And I was done denying it. Now, I needed a plan. Not to hurt them, not to destroy blindly, but to reveal them, to expose them, to let the world see them as they truly were, to make sure their lies collapsed under the weight of the truth they thought would remain hidden forever. I locked the bakery and walked home slowly, my steps steady, the night air cool against my skin, each breath clearing the fog inside me. I reached my house and saw the faint light glowing from the bedroom where Hector slept, oblivious to the storm preparing itself around him. My heart did not tremble this time. My hands did not shake this time. Only clarity remained. Clarity sharper than grief, clarity sharper than vengeance, and clarity sharp enough to carve a path forward. And as I lay down beside the man who betrayed me more deeply than I once believed possible, I whispered a silent promise to myself, not of revenge, but of truth, cold, relentless, and inevitable. The unraveling had only begun. The darkness before dawn held the kind of silence that feels thick enough to touch, a silence that presses against your skin and warns you that something irreversible is approaching, something that will pull the ground out from under your feet forever.
I woke long before the first hint of sunlight and sat.
Hector opened the door, quickly scanning the street to make sure no one saw. But no amount of caution could erase the truth from the eyes of the woman watching them from across the road. They entered the house, and I took out my phone, connecting to the hidden recording device I had planted behind the headboard the night before. Bianca laughed the moment she stepped inside, her voice floating through the speakers like a mocking melody. She teased Hector about how free they finally were. In my house, in my space, in the room where I once slept, believing in vows that meant nothing to him. Their voices grew soft, then intimate. Noises followed that twisted my stomach into knots. But I forced myself to listen because truth is not gentle. Truth is not merciful. Truth requires courage that feels like scraping your heart raw. And I needed every detail, every sound, every word. But suddenly, the tone changed. Bianca gasped in shock, panic trembling through her voice. "Something is wrong. I cannot move," she said in a frantic whisper. Hector cursed, telling her to stay calm, but fear wrapped around his own words too thick to hide. I activated the plan, the smoke trap I prepared in the kitchen earlier. A simple pot of oil left over low heat and triggered to produce thick, dark smoke that would spill through the window the moment the ignition caught. Within seconds, smoke curled up in heavy swirls, visible from the street, spreading out like a silent alarm. The neighbors rushed out, shouting and pointing toward the house, panic flooding through the air. Someone yelled that the kitchen might be on fire. Another shouted to call the fire department, and within moments, the blaring siren of a fire truck echoed down the street. My son, Mateo, arrived wearing his fire chief uniform, his face sharp with urgency. I felt a sharp pain in my chest as I watched him run toward the house. The betrayal he was about to discover would crush something deep inside him, something that could never be restored. But the truth needed to be exposed, not just for me, but for him, for everyone who trusted these two people who were destroying lives like it was nothing but a casual game. Mateo smashed the door open with his team, smoke billowing around them, though the real fire was not in the kitchen, it was in the bedroom where the truth struggled to hide behind shut doors. Through my headphones, I heard the moment they found them, Bianca crying, Hector yelling, both stuck together, helpless, ridiculous, and humiliated, their voices rising with panic, their disgrace finally dragged into the open. I imagined Mateo's face the moment he saw his father and his wife tangled in betrayal, a scene so filthy, so twisted, so unforgivable that no child should ever witness it. The firefighters gathered around, stunned, some gasping, some whispering, one letting out a short, shocked laugh before Mateo shut it down with a harsh command for silence. The truth was no longer a secret, no longer protected by lies. It was exposed, under bright lights, under the eyes of a neighborhood that would never forget what it saw. As the team wrapped them in sheets and carried them outside, the crowd murmured in disbelief and horror. They had no idea I was watching them from across the street, my body still, my mind quiet, my heart steady, because truth had finally reached daylight, and there was no turning back. This was only the second step in a plan shaped not by cruelty, but by justice, and I knew with certainty that more would follow.
Hector opened his mouth to speak, but no words escaped, only a pathetic rasp that revealed the collapse of the man who once stood beside me as a husband, who once promised me loyalty and care. His face twisted with shame, then with pain, then with something like desperation, as if he hoped I might still be the gentle woman who forgave small lies and overlooked cold nights. But that woman no longer existed. She had burned away in the fires of truth. All that remained was someone who saw things clearly, without illusion, without softness, without any desire to carry the weight of his wrongdoing. Bianca whispered that she was sorry, though even her apology sounded like a plea for offense to be softened, not for guilt to be acknowledged. She said my name like it was a fragile object she hoped would not shatter in her hands. But I was not fragile, and the name she spoke no longer belonged to someone she could manipulate. Behind her sunglasses and smiles, I told her gently that she needed to focus on her future, because her place in our family had ended the moment she stepped into my home with my husband in the middle of a weekday morning and closed the door behind her with no fear of consequences.
Their shame deepened, but the moment became heavier still when another presence filled the doorway. My son, Matteo, dressed in his uniform, though his shoulders sagged under the weight of something no uniform could shield him from. His eyes dark with exhaustion, hurt, disbelief, and a grief so sharp it felt like a blade slicing through the air around us. He held a folder in his hands, his grip so tight his knuckles had turned the color of chalk. He did not look at Bianca. He did not look at Hector. He looked only at me and nodded. A simple gesture that carried more love, more trust, more sorrow than any words could offer. I stepped aside as Matteo approached the bed, his breathing uneven but controlled. He opened the folder and placed a stack of documents on the table. The top page clearly labeled divorce agreement, followed by asset protection statements and clauses crafted to remove Hector from every business connection, every financial tie, every authority he once believed he deserved. It was all arranged, cleanly, clearly, undeniably. A decision that could not be reversed or softened by tears or apologies or promises. Hector whispered, "Mariela, please." But his plea collapsed into the space between us, weak and powerless, and too late. Far too late. I told him that our marriage ended the moment he chose dishonesty over loyalty, the moment he chose lust over respect, the moment he allowed Bianca to poison the foundation of our family. He lowered his head and cried, but his tears carried no weight for me. They slid down a face that had lied far too many times for forgiveness to reach. Bianca tried to speak to Matteo, reaching toward him with trembling fingers, but he stepped back, shaking his head with a fury so quiet it froze the room. He told her he had nothing left to say, that she had torn apart not only his marriage, but a piece of his soul, a piece that would never return, no matter how many apologies she offered. He told her that trust, once shattered, does not heal, it scars, and those scars stay forever to remind us of the wounds they cover. I handed them both the tubes of ointment lying on the table and told them the doctors instructed they apply it immediately. I stepped out of the room and walked a few paces down the hall, waiting in the heavy silence that stretched behind me. Within seconds, their screams echoed through the corridor. Wild, sharp, and desperate. Footsteps rushed, nurses panicked, voices rose, confusion filled the hallway, but their pain barely stirred my heart. Mustard was harmless and temporary compared to the devastation they had unleashed on my family. When the commotion settled, Matteo and I walked outside together, the late afternoon sun touching our faces with a warmth that felt foreign after the cold reality of the hospital. We stood near the parking lot, breathing slowly, letting the air cleanse the remnants of the day that had turned our lives upside down. He leaned against the railing, his eyes closed, and whispered that he did not know how to start over. I told him we would rebuild, not quickly, not easily, but together, step by step, breath by breath, sunrise by sunrise. For the first time since this nightmare began, he allowed himself to lean on me, truly lean, as a son, as a wounded soul searching for steady ground, and I wrapped my arm around him, feeling strength flow through both of us, not from revenge, not from victory, but from truth. Truth that hurts, truth that heals, truth that frees. We walked home side by side, leaving behind the place where betrayal had been stripped naked and consequences had finally found their rightful owners. The days that followed the hospital incident moved slowly, like thick honey sliding down the walls of my life, each hour dripping with the weight of consequences and the debris of broken trust. The neighborhood whispered, the city buzzed, the bakery filled with customers carrying sideways glances and quiet questions. But through it all, Matteo and I moved with a shared silence. A silence not of avoidance, but of healing. A silence built from two hearts that had been cut open and were learning how to beat again. For the first time in years, the house felt peaceful,
No lies, no late-night messages, no unfamiliar perfumes clinging to the air. The rooms breathed again, and so did I. I spent early mornings in the bakery, kneading dough with a rhythm that felt like meditation, like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been lost behind years of pretending normalcy while my marriage decayed unnoticed or ignored. I watched Matteo slowly piece himself together through long talks with trusted friends, through work that gave him purpose, and through evenings where we sat in the quiet, sharing memories of his childhood when life was simpler and loyalty meant something. But healing is rarely simple, because truth once revealed rarely stays quiet. It ripples, it spreads, it exposes hidden layers I did not yet know existed. And within a week, a new wave of revelations reached us, carried by the same private investigator who had first shown me the path out of the darkness. Rodolfo called and asked me to meet him in my office at the bakery, his voice steady but laced with a tone that made my stomach tighten. When he arrived, he placed a large folder on the table, thicker than the first one, filled with documents, photographs, signatures, and financial trails that twisted like a maze through bank accounts and property lines. He explained that while tracking Hector's movements, he uncovered more than infidelity, more than betrayal. He uncovered theft, not of my bakery, but of funds connected to Matteo, funds meant for a future Hector had secretly taken for himself, funneling money into accounts he kept hidden under another name, accounts Bianca had full access to. My breath hitched as he laid out the evidence, page after page, ink revealing more truth than spoken confession ever could. Hector had planned to leave me, not for love, but for greed. He had planned to sell his share of our home, steal Matteo's savings, and flee with Bianca to another city where they would start a new life built on my labor, my sacrifices, my decades of loyalty. The betrayal was deeper than flesh. It was rooted in greed, planted long before the affair had begun.
Rodolfo then revealed something even darker, something that made the room tilt beneath my feet. Bianca had approached a lawyer weeks before the incident, asking what would happen if the legal owner of a business died unexpectedly. The question, documented in an email thread, was hauntingly cold and deliberate. I sat frozen, my lungs refusing to move, the edges of the world blurring as the truth settled over me. They had not only betrayed me emotionally, they had considered removing me entirely, removing me permanently, to take everything I built, everything I loved, everything I ever poured my soul into. They wanted me gone, not divorced, not distant, gone. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might break through my ribs and crash onto the table. The shock simmered into something sharper than anger, something that tasted like survival, like a flame refusing to go out, even when wind tried to smother it. I thanked Rodolfo for his unwavering work and sent him home with a warm bag of fresh bread, a small gesture for a man who had saved my life without ever stepping into danger himself. Then I sat alone in my office, staring at the walls as if answers might appear on their surfaces, but the answers were already in me, clear, strong, undeniable. I went to the police the next morning, carrying the folder like a shield. The officer who handled my case listened carefully, his eyes widening with every document he examined. The financial records, the emails, the recordings, the receipts, the timeline. Everything formed a perfect picture of conspiracy, theft, and intent to harm. He assured me the district attorney would pursue the case with full force, and that I had done the right thing by coming forward, even though the weight of that right thing pressed on my shoulders like a mountain. Within days, detectives visited Hector, both at the hospital and later at the chic motel he moved into after discharge. Bianca had already fled, leaving behind nothing but a broken marriage, a shattered family, and a list of crimes long enough to bury her future. Matteo stood by me through every meeting, every update, every hearing.
his presence a steady anchor in the storm that had once threatened to drown us both. He no longer looked like a man dragged through heartbreak. He looked like someone rising again, taller, stronger, wiser. But the most unexpected moment came weeks later. As I was closing the bakery for the night, the sun dipping into the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of amber and rose, I heard the door open softly. Thinking I had forgotten a customer inside, I turned and saw a figure I never expected to face willingly again. Hector stood in the doorway, thinner, older, haunted by the ruin he had created, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched the divorce papers, the police notices, and a small envelope sealed and worn. He walked toward me slowly, asking for a moment of my time. His voice cracked like an old bridge, unable to hold its own weight. He said he needed to return something he should never have taken, something he kept hidden for years. He handed me the envelope and stepped back as though expecting me to explode or crumble or collapse, but I did none of those things. I opened it calmly and found a photograph inside of a younger version of myself holding a newborn Mateo in the hospital room the day he first arrived in the world. Tears blurred the edges of my sight as I realized Hector had kept this photo in his wallet for decades and then hid it away when guilt grew too heavy for him to bear. He whispered that he remembered the moment he first saw me holding Mateo, remembered believing our small family would be built on love and trust, remembered the promise he once made to protect us, and said somewhere along the way, he became a man he no longer recognized. He asked for forgiveness, not as a husband, but as a man desperate to free himself from the weight of his crimes. But forgiveness was not mine to give. Not yet. Maybe never ever. I told him the truth was the only thing that mattered now, and that truth required consequences. He nodded, tears finally falling, and walked out of my bakery, disappearing into the fading light like the end of a story that was never meant to last. Weeks later, after legal battles and public scandal, after Bianca was arrested, after Hector's plea deal was processed, after my bakery expanded again with the support of loyal customers who admired strength and resilience, I stood alone in the quiet shop watching the ovens glow with warm golden light, my heart steady, my soul unbroken, and my future open wide in front of me, a future no longer tangled in lies, a future rebuilt from flames and truth. And then, something shifted in the doorway. A slow, deliberate knock, followed by a voice gentle, steady, familiar in a new way. Mateo stood with a small envelope of his own, asking me to open it. Inside was a document granting me full ownership of a new bakery location he had purchased in secret, a gift not of guilt, but of hope. A fresh start for both of us, a reminder that even after the deepest betrayal, new beginnings can rise from ashes. I hugged him with the strength of a mother who survived storms meant to destroy her, and whispered that no matter what happened next, we were finally free, truly free. And as the ovens hummed and the sweet scent of bread filled the air, I realized something powerful. The story that nearly ended us became the story that gave us back our lives. The end that tried to break me became the beginning that rebuilt me.